I've been CEO both as a man and a woman, and I can tell from own experience what are the differences, and that usually intrigues people.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of the World Class Leader Show. In today's episode, I'm so excited to have with me Caroline Farberger. So Caroline is a professional chairperson, a board member, tech investor, experienced CEO, keynote speaker, and author. And up until 2022, she was a CEO of the Swedish insurer ICA Insurance, having spent a total of 25 years in the financial industry on several senior management positions. In addition to her line management experience, Caroline has also been a .com entrepreneur consultant with McKinsey too, and also has been a first senior business leader in the Nordics to speak openly about her gender transition. And so that's really an interesting conversation today. So we're going to talk about CEOs, as always, impact, performance, future, but also we're going to tackle one of the most important elements right now, which is really gender diversity. So Caroline, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Happy to be here with you.
Super. So where are you today, Caroline, exactly, for the audience?
Well, I'm actually sitting at my home in the small town of Sigtuna, north of Stockholm in Sweden, where I have my residence.
That's awesome. And I don't know, guys, if you know in the audience, I lived in a Scandinavian country too, but the other side, Norway, so for a year. So I'm very familiar with Scandinavian culture. So always happy to have some people from the North coming to the show. And Caroline, so the reason why I connected, because Caroline, she's a speaker, so she speaks also a lot in number of global events. She's been also in BBC recently, and as far as I remember, the interview was a blast, right? So you had a lot of people listening. What was your experience, by the way, Caroline, speaking with BBC?
I'm always happy to speak about my experiences, and the usual angle of the interview is that I've been CEO both as a man and a woman, and I can tell from own experience what are the differences, and that usually intrigues people.
Yeah, and by the way, you're already intriguing me because it's good to see. Look, I think that's very interesting. I never thought about having a CEO reflection experience from two different angles, from the different perspective, but from the same person, right? Because otherwise we create a sort of different bias too. So maybe that is a good start of the conversation. So being a CEO for many years by the way, how many employees ICA Insurance used to have when you were there?
We had 500 employees.
500. Okay, good. Yeah. And how many years you've been as a CEO for insurance, more or less?
6 years, up until 1 year ago.
Great. That's wonderful. And now, as far as we discussed last time, you are much more involved as a board member, right? So that's you change a little bit the side of the same table, right?
Yes.
So why don't we start with the CEO experience? Because you're a little bit back on your time. Then we'll cover as well on the board. But you just raised a very good point. So what does it mean being a CEO before as a man and then as a woman? So what is a different perspective that you can tell us? How that changed for you, and then maybe for sure also for the organization?
When I lived as a male CEO, which is up until around 5 years ago, I actually genuinely thought that I knew it all about gender equality and the situation for women in business. If someone asked me, I could talk with great confidence on the topic. And I also genuinely believed that everyone had the same opportunity, regardless of gender or minority status. And that there are always good explanations why there are so few minorities on CEO positions, like different interests and like. It took me only a few months to live as a woman, as a female CEO, to realize how wrong I had been and how little I had understood on this topic.
Wow. Why is
and
that?
it was not because I was treated differently myself. After all, I had my CEO business card, which still gave me privileges. But rather, the women around me included me as one of them in the female community. And they told me stories they hadn't told me before, like how tough the jargon could be, those jokes that were laughed at, some of them were not at all that funny, how difficult it was to make your voice heard in meetings, how difficult it was to influenced decisions that seemingly had been made by men outside the meeting room, and even examples of sexual harassment that had gone unreported in the system due to lack of faith in the system, committed by men close to me. And I trusted those men and asked these women, why didn't you tell me all of this before? We had so many one-on-one meetings, I asked all the right questions in the HR rule book.
Right.
And they were like, don't you see, you lived as a man back then. You wouldn't have understood. If I would have come to you with all these things, you would just see me as a weak person, as a complaining person, someone who not fit for management. Then I realized that when I lived as a man, I didn't have the complete picture of what was going on around me. I had a filtered picture because I had a rather tough attitude towards management. Growing up as a boy, learning how to fight in the schoolyards, and then a year in the military, being trained not to show weakness. Then my first 6 working years as a management consultant with McKinsey, working 80 hours a week, being trained never to complain about high workload. So I had a rather tough attitude towards management, which made me unconsciously blind to people not having the same privileges I had. Because we live in a business world with norms, and depending on geography, there's usually one type of persons who are the norm. And in my part of the world, Northern Europe, it's being a white, straight male, which is the dominant category.
Yes.
And if you belong to that category, you have privileges. You don't see them in writing, but it's part of everyday life. And I was blind to that. I refused to believe it when I belonged to the privilege category, but I see it now. It's very hard to see privileges if you yourself belong to the privilege category.
Yeah, look, it's so fascinating because essentially what you are saying is you were, as everybody does, you were wearing a pair of lens, and the pair of lens has changed, when you decide to make the change for yourself as a person, and then immediately you started to see things completely from a different pair of lens, right? And also, but also people around you, they perceive you. So it sounds like also people around you, particularly female, as you described, they've also changed the pair of lens in the relation that they had with the CEO. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Because one of the key differences why I gained the trust at a deeper level with women and other minorities around me was that I dared to show vulnerability. I dared to show weakness because I've been trained during my 50 years as a man on higher levels always to project strength, never to show weakness, always to be super confident about stuff, although I might be insecure inside myself. And if you always project strength and never admit any weaknesses, you actually, I now realize, do not invite to have really authentic discussions. You do not invite other people around you to talk about their weaknesses and their vulnerabilities if you don't do it yourself. And when I did my gender transition, which many people saw as, wow, that was brave, you showed a lot of vulnerability, then other people dared to show vulnerability also, and I
Of
got to
course.
know them on a completely different level.
Yeah, that's amazing because they've seen the leaders do first to say, yeah, I can do it, or I can say exactly how I feel, right? I love that. It's really, and I suppose, is it fair to say that once, I mean, sounds like that after the move that you made internal in the organization, you have directly or indirectly generated a different level of openness and transparency within the entire organization. It sounds like, based on what I'm understanding, right, from you. Did that impact as well the level of results and performance, in your opinion, that level of openness and transparency?
Yes, but only because I also changed management style. And here's why we come into the area of diversity and inclusion. Because when I lived as a male CEO, I thought I knew it all about diversity and inclusion. It was like, I mean, give me the metrics and I will deliver on them while I'm anyway delivering my quarterly report. And in diversity, you usually have metrics like, maybe gender composition in our management board, etc. I could deliver on that. I had 5 men and 5 women. Yes, the women were head of legal and HR, compliance and risk management, and all the guys were the business line heads, because
Right.
after all, that was a business. And this thing about inclusion, it was so vague and there were no KPIs. So I thought I can probably talk myself out of it if someone asks me when I'm on stage. But then I realized that's where the real value is. Because if you take strides employing diverse people, but you don't use their assets and their knowledge, it makes little use of employing them other than for show. So I realized I had a rather excluding management style I was told by women after my transition when they dared to give me honest feedback. I was told that I had a very dominating management style. I usually open my management meetings by stating what is to be discussed and then my preferred way of solving it.
So be
And
more
then I had
directive, it sounds like. Yeah.
Yes, and then as a supporter, I had my male CFO and saying the same thing, supporting me because, of course, we had talked before the meeting so that we would, heaven forbid, not contradict one another in the meeting. And then there were another guy also supporting us. Suddenly, we were three guys saying the same thing. And then I asked the other people in the room, including the women, do we have any more opinions? And they
Right.
usually just gave me smiles because they knew that I didn't want to hear anything else. I wanted to have loyalty, team building. I was a team captain. And loyalty in my view back then was being loyal to my opinion.
Mm.
But then I realized afterwards that I had spent time recruiting diverse people with diverse background and knowledge that I didn't have, but I didn't use that knowledge.
You didn't
Uh,
listen properly
no,
there
but
and leverage that, right?
yeah, and then I understood what inclusive leadership is. Inclusive leadership, that's a management style and culture that allows everyone to be themselves and
Mm.
bring their whole selves to work. And where you as an employer see the uniquenesses we have in background and skill set as an advantage to the business. So
Yes.
I changed my management style. Instead of opening the meeting myself, I let someone else prepare the matter, present the matter to be discussed, and then I facilitated the discussion in such a way that it was balanced and everyone contributed. In every management meeting I've had, there's usually a few people who are very generous,
Mm.
generous in sharing their opinions on any matter that's being discussed, regardless of their own knowledge of the matter, right?
Yes.
Those people have to manage down and instead encourage people with more diverse background to talk. And I, as a manager, made sure that I didn't make up my own mind which way to go until I understood the perspective from everyone in the room, especially those with a diverse background. That made us make better business decisions. Yes, the discussions were sometimes longer, but in my experience as a CEO, we made better business discussions, better business decisions, leading to better financial results.
I totally agree. I mean, to me, that is music for my ear. So it sounds like you changed from being a little bit more directive as a CEO, as a leader, to become more like a facilitator. And actually, in the way I prefer saying, is more like an orchestrator. So is right. He's orchestrating different point of views and make sure everybody feels heard and that contribute and can give his personal ideas, right?
Yes, exactly. And so, which was a contradiction to the management style, let's say the more macho management style that I had learned as a man. Because when I grew up, I'm 55 years old now. When I grew up, those were the big icons in business world. Guys with strong opinions, and those were
Yes.
my role models. The problem is that the world is moving so fast now, and new knowledge is required. And if you as a leader are not open up and
Mm.
include people with different knowledge and let yourself influenced by them, you will be bypassed by competitors.
And agree. And by the way, when we talk about diversity, I think there is still a lot of misunderstanding what really diversity means, because it's very easy to relate diversity in terms of race or gender or age, but there are so many other diversities that are not even considered, right? So that's
Yeah,
something that, yeah, go on.
yeah, there are aspects of diversity that is visible on a photograph. There are aspects of diversity that you
Exactly.
actually need a CV to see, for example, degrees, or you might have a very peculiar university diploma, but it's also cognitive diversity. Some people
Exactly.
are very structured, some are very creative, and if you do not actively construct your management team of people with complementary skill sets and complementary way of thinking, you run the risk of having very uniform decision-making style that in short term it might feel efficient and you feel you make quick decisions, make things happen, but you might make the wrong decisions and your competitors might make better decisions.
No, yeah, 100% agree with you. And by the way, so going back to your relationship with the executive team, your own leadership team, after you made the change, and you changed your management style too, what sort of response you got from the leadership team, right? Because
Yeah.
look, I do a lot of work with the CEOs and with the board. So, working with the up and coming talents, working for the next level leaders, it's easier to shape changes. Actually, they
Yes.
welcome new novelty, welcome a more open culture, etc. Sometimes, especially with the executive, they've been there for many years. You brought such an element of change,
Yes.
altogether to some extent. How have you been able to drive change at that level?
Well, first of all, it's always good to have the privilege of having a CEO business card because ultimately, at the end of the day, I decide.
Yes,
But
that
secondly,
helps.
also uh, having undergone a gender transition while in my position as CEO, I believe also gave me a lot of personal respect as a human being, of someone who's done something that is brave.
Yes,
Um, but also, I told my story in such a way that especially to the other men actually opened their eyes a bit because I told them that I had been so ignorant to a number of aspects that I didn't see, which I hope helped them along the way. But needless to say, I mean, some of the macho men, they didn't say very much. They went along because of loyalty, because the benefit with men as in general is that they understand hierarchies, and if someone above them tells you something, they
yes,
more often than not obey. But the more interesting aspect is that the minorities around me, especially women, they opened up very much because they felt that they could connect to me,
yes, yes,
and they dared to share their opinions, even if those opinions differed from the macho men in the room. And when I gave them support and encouraged them to continue share their opinions, they were much more engaged.
yes,
So my retention rate ratios of some very highly skilled talent improved. For example, in financial services where I operate, risk management and compliance resources are usually very scarce, and they usually change
mm,
employers every now and then to increase their salary. Both of these women in charge of risk and compliance came to me and said that they had competing offers with higher salaries, but that they chose to remain in my team because here they felt included, that their opinions matter, as opposed to just being happy of having a seat at the table but never being listened to. So there are HR aspects also to it, in addition to the aspects of actually making better decisions.
yeah, that's brilliant. So it's essentially they felt understood, listened, understood, and consider. So in other words, valued, right?
Yes, and we had a much more balanced discussions because again, in the old days, I and my CFO, we had a pre-meeting where we kind of agreed between the two of us what we should agree in the bigger management meeting,
Right.
and it was very difficult to achieve another outcome for the other people. Now I very much came in with an open mind. What can I learn from my colleagues before I make my decision? That was my mental state.
That's great. Now, here's a tough question, I think. You said before, going through that personal transition as a CEO has helped you because you had already the privilege of being CEO. So,
Mm.
either an organization is very hierarchical or not, but
Mm.
clearly, the status of a CEO. So it clearly you can shape and drive different actions, a different way of dealing because you are a CEO. So you
Mm.
are essentially driving the agenda. Regardless, of course you are facilitating or orchestrating more on the listening. Now, the tough question is, if you were not the CEO, so if you
Mm.
just were another member of the executive team, I'm not
Mm.
even say director or manager, I'm just saying even do you think that you would have been able to let everyone in the organization be more aware about diversity and importance of that, or you think you could have not achieved the same level of results that you did just because you were a CEO?
A good question. Most certainly, I've had privileges in doing this. At the same time, there's also been a lot of more spotlight on me. And if I would have done something wrong or inappropriate in a way, there would have been bigger consequences. So there's higher pressure on me. But having said that, if I would have done it at a more junior level in the organization, it would be highly dependent on the attitude of my next manager and maybe the next manager in line after that, which boils down to the company culture. Because even I mean, I was CEO, but still part of a bigger conglomerate, ICA. And I sense that in the culture that they would probably accept me if I came out, because I've had employers previously in my career at which place I would not have felt comfortable, because if you are an LGBTQ person, you can sense in the air if it will be work. I mean, it's what is being joked about around the coffee table. What is the attitude to minorities or even just women? I mean, are there sexist jokes in the meeting room, etc.? You can sense that, and I felt that it was very good culture where you celebrated diversity. Either you just tolerate diversity. I mean, all big employers tolerate diversity. We have beautifully written HR policies to talk about anti-discrimination and all the stuff. But do you just tolerate it? That is, that you will deal with it according to the law when it happens, or do you celebrate it? Do you have in the culture that you see it as a benefit that people are themselves? I felt that my employees celebrated diversity. That made me feel secure that I dare to come out here.
And I assume that if you didn't feel the organization was able to celebrate you, you would have probably not do it in that organization, at least, right?
I would probably had switched to another employer where I would have felt more safe.
Right. I like actually what you said. It made me thinking about, so tolerating diversity essentially sounds like kind of a baseline. So it's a kind of a minimum condition to have everyone feel at least they can be part of the conversation or the organization. But then the huge big step ahead is when you start celebrating and appreciating that way diversity, which is really what differentiates organizations from a cultural standpoint. That's what my takeaway from what you just said. Is that right?
That is exactly right. And I looked for proof points. How do I know that they celebrate diversity? And to give you one example, the bigger ICA group that my insurance company belonged to is actually a large grocery retail chain in Sweden. There was this local store owner from an own initiative decided to hoist the pride flag outside their store. There were right-wing extremists who were opposing that and even painted racist graffiti on the outside walls of that store. What did the store owner do? The store owner decided to raise the bets and they ordered plastic bags with a new graphic layout with pride flags, so that all customers leaving the store used plastic bags with rainbow colors, simply to sort of raise the stakes and take a stance. And that story was celebrated internally in the whole organization. That store owner was celebrated as a hero. And I'm not sure that would have happened in all organizations across the world, but I felt that, wow, here's how you celebrate a hero who's taking a stance on important matters.
So do you think that cultural change stick then in ICA because you left, right? So 1 year ago, as far as I understand correctly from your bio, so 1 year ago you left as a CEO.
Yes.
So based on your understanding about how CA is going now, do you think
Yes.
that the cultural change that you drove about diversity as now is very stick? Is very still very present, or you feel that given that you were a
No,
CEO, you're leaving, so you might
no,
probably potentially lose that sort of
no.
momentum?
I believe that the ICA organization are still quite proud of having harbored me to be the employer who actually managed to pull this through, because I see it as a joint success, a success for me as a human being, that I could find the courage to come out as who I am. I mean, doing a gender transition at the age of 55 and being a CEO required some courage for me. But I also think that ICA is also proud that they managed to do this, because after all, I worked there 2 years as a man, 4 years as a woman. And the reason why I left a year ago, because I wanted to pursue a professional board career, so I could own my time a bit more.
Yeah, and I'll ask you in the next question more about your board experience. I'm just curious about the last thing that you said in terms of courage. Of course, courage is clearly one of your attributes based on personal experience. Do you think that courage was something that you had already before, or something that you developed by the time? And how much courage now is a part of your way of
Yeah,
leading organization and be in front of everyone to speak
yeah.
about? So how much courage was already there? How much you build it through experience?
I think it's the maturity of age, turning 50. I mean, I wouldn't have had the courage when I was still 30 years old. But at that time, I was a McKinsey consultant, preoccupied of conforming to whatever
Yes,
norms were prevalent
yes,
at my employer. But turning 50 and being more secure of myself, and thought that I have only one life to live. I have the right to live my life the way I want to live my life. And also, but seeing my children in their eyes. I mean, if if I don't make a contribution myself to be authentic in my life and live my life the way I want, what would I tell my children if one of my children said that, Dad, I think I'm homosexual? I mean, would I enter a discussion with my child? My child, there are pros and cons of coming out as who you are. Society might treat you badly, and blah, blah. Or would
of
I
course.
encourage my child? Of course, I would encourage my child to live authentically. And then I thought, what kind of role model would I be as a parent if I didn't live authentically? So, I mean, the maturity of age and being a parent helped me.
That's great. That's wonderful experience, by the way. Um, so we said, you then decided to move more into board member. So what was the reason
Yes.
why you decided to be more involved with board and not having any more
Yeah.
CEOs
Yes.
responsibility?
Yeah.
And
I mean,
what is your takeaway now working as a board member? So from the other side of the table, what are some reflection that you
yeah.
have now based
Yeah, I
on?
mean, yeah. When I still lived as a man, I realized now in hindsight that being a CEO, being in charge of a big P&L, was very closely associated to my ego. That is, when I looked myself in the mirror, I wanted to see a CEO, a successful CEO. And whenever had was being suggested for promotion, it was very important for me to measure, okay, how much would my top line be? How many employees would I command? That was important for my ego. I now realize in hindsight that I wasn't really based on my values or what I really thought was important in life. And having spent 4 years as a female CEO, I kind of realized that what is important for me in life is to actually steer my priorities myself, what I want to engage myself in, own my time, but also be more value based. That is, devote my time on things where I see I can make a huge impact. Because after a while, I mean, I was CEO for 6 years with the same company. It becomes a lot of routine after a while. You have Monday management meetings, you have quarterly meetings, I mean, it's very much routine. And I also felt that I've delegated a lot of the authority to my management team. It wasn't really challenging for me myself.
Mm,
So I felt that by owning my time, I could make sure that I dynamically shift the composition of stuff I do so that I feel that whatever I spend my time on is actually value-based and creates an impact. So I do essentially three things. I'm a general partner and the chairperson of a venture capital firm called Well Street. There I spend some of my time working with the investments in small tech companies and helping them along the way, as venture capitalists do. Then I have a portfolio of professional board memberships, one real estate chain, one bank, and one big insurance broker, where I use my skill set in financial services, because then I can both work in the boardroom and then as a consultant within the organization, helping management with topics I've experience in. And then I also do keynote speaking across Europe and North America on how to on diversity and inclusion and how to do inclusive management and authentic management. And I feel that the composition of activities gives me much more freedom than being a CEO, because I know being a CEO is like you're always on alert. If your phone rings on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning, your heartbeat goes up. Oh, now maybe something bad has happened. The IT has broken down, or a key part of your management team is resigning, or a large customer is being unhappy. You're almost in a CMI crisis mode.
Yes.
At age of 55, I'm very happy to have those years behind me.
Yes, I think so. It sounds like, probably it's a better positioning for you because you stay elevated a bit, right? So you're not into the day-to-day, into,
Yes.
all the entrenched into the crisis, into the operational element of being a CEO, which is a risk, right? Because
and I can also engage as a coach to many executive teams on leadership without being biased myself. If I was still CEO, it would be difficult to explain how could I spend time doing that. But working with others, helping others without having a vested interest myself is hugely liberating.
I can bet on this. That's great. So, Caroline, I mean, time is flying, and I love this conversation. I want you also to, if you want to give some sort of advice to, the CEOs that we have right now in the audience today, they're listening, or board members, or anyway, other sort of senior leaders. They are struggling to, you mentioned a little bit earlier in the conversation. I love the point. I really, maybe we need to spend an entire episode there, right? How measuring, right?
Yes.
The gender diversity, and in general speaking, the diversity and the quality. What sort of advice that could be practical today for the audience to listen or to hear from you in order to drive a differently strategy about gender equality in their organizations? Because I know there are so many that are thinking, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing? Or just, scratching the surface, the surface just to show that we're doing something, right?
Yeah. I mean, do not see diversity and inclusion as an HR issue that you don't need to deal with yourself. Do not see it as just something that you need for your sustainability report in order to look good and satisfy external stakeholders. In fact, it is a culture and a management style that can not only make the company as such more successful, but actually you as a person. When I was 50 years old, I remember I had the attitude that I probably don't need to learn so much more stuff, because after all, I was a successful CEO, and
what's the point, right?
whatever I've learned, I can probably just replicate, copy paste for the remaining stretch of my professional life, and have an easy ride. I now realize that the world is moving faster than ever before, and life is a continuous learning journey. If you do not educate yourself, if you do not constantly learn more about what you don't know about, including this topic we're talking about, then you might become obsolete before you are ready for it. So realize that there's a lot of stuff that you probably don't know about diversity and inclusion. It's something that you need to deal with it personally. You need to educate yourself about what you do not know. And it's in your own interest. You will be a better leader. You will be more relevant. You will be more successful. Your company will be more successful. It should be a personal priority for you. And also, we still have issues out there in the workforce about not taking full advantage of the skill sets that diverse employees have, including women. If you're not yourself part of the solution of creating a better, more including culture, you might unconsciously be part of the problem.
Mm, totally right. You become part of the conditions, essentially, right? And by the way, I love the point about it starts from you educating yourself. And I think it's also a personal transformation that you have to go through, really, because it doesn't mean that you have to go through your own journey, right? Like yours, Caroline, because of course that's not common and frequent, and it shouldn't be, right? Because that's not it requires a particular level of courage, as you said before. But also, I think if you don't really understand what does it mean personally to appreciate diversity, you will never really be able to do it, because you're going to get stuck with your own bias and perception and belief that you already have, right?
Yeah, and it's so interesting to see uh, when I meet with senior male executives who suddenly start talking about this topic. It more often turns out that they, for example, have daughters who have challenged them, because then it suddenly becomes a personal issue. Before, it was maybe just a statistical thing that wasn't really close upon them. But suddenly, if they have daughters being senior teenagers and start to challenge their dads, then they start to understand. So if you have seek out people close to yourself and
Yes.
confide in people close to yourself at work, and ask them to give you some pretty hard feedback, and tell you what you might not know yourself about your management style.
Yeah, I love that. The closer you get to diversity and inclusion, the more will be, or the easier will be to understand exactly what does it mean for others, but also start using a different pair of lens, going back to the context, right? Of the relationship.
Because if you hear messages from someone you can relate to, a family
Yes,
member or a
yes,
close associate at work, you tend to listen a bit more.
totally right. Yeah, because it's something
Mm.
that happens to you. You feel that might happen to you in a
Yes.
way or another. So, well, that's great. I think that is really starting point for driving that different agenda. So, Caroline, last three questions. I'm looking for a quick answer as much as you can. So,
Mm.
is there one thing above everything that we discussed today, there is one single element that you can say, looking back to all my experience, I learned one thing. There is one thing above many others that for you represent the biggest learning of your career or your experience?
It would be that the biggest asset in any organization is the potential in the people in the organization. It is not the structures as such or the physical assets, but the ambition and the commitment and the energy in the people. And it's up to me as a manager to shape my management style so as to maximize that potential.
Great. And in terms of learning, is there any specific, so what is your way of learning more about yourself, learning about things that you don't have? I mean, are you
Uh, uh,
normally, yeah, what's your
I
way
mean,
to learn for you?
I I constantly seek out opportunities to meet new people. For example, when I lived as a man, I was a very regular Freemason. I meet my close buddies at the Freemason Lodge
Yeah.
usually every week. I met the same people all over again, and which was very comfortable. But very rarely did our opinions differ. But now I constantly seek out opportunities. How could I expose myself to as much new people as possible, preferably of different kinds, religions, geographies, and and learn from them, to seek opportunities to learn.
Yeah. And again, I think you have an incredible privilege of being able through your story, your career, to being yourself in completely different perspective and see things in a different way, embracing both and change your actions according to the way how you have seen things, which is to me is the most important thing for ourselves and to drive different performance. Finally, it's an interesting question. Sometimes gets a very different answer. So, is there anything that you would have done differently in your story, in your career, based on what you know now?
Well, actually, I have the mental latitude to say clear no to that, because all the decisions I've made throughout my life, I've made with the knowledge and the courage and inspiration I had at that time.
Yes.
So I don't regret any steps. If I could theoretically take my wisdom from now early in life, maybe I would have made differently. But again, that's hypothetical. The only thing that I spend time on, it is what I can do going forward.
Right. And many CEOs, by the way, they think in the same way. So they don't see even failures or setbacks, even if you don't tell it, but I'm saying general as a regret. They say, I am as a result of what happened to me in the past. And sometimes you can make decision a little bit earlier, a little bit later, but doesn't really change the journey or the path that you're going through. So love that. Caroline, that's amazing. So where people should go if they want to know more about your job, your work, and what you're doing?
Well, you find me on LinkedIn, Caroline Farberger. I respond to anyone. I also have a homepage, carolinefarberger.com, where I have links to media articles in many languages. So, if your native language is not English, I'm quite sure that there are news clippings in your local language on my homepage, carolinefarberger.com.
And we'll put them in the show notes so people that can easily go there.
Mm-hmm.
So, Caroline, thank you so much for being with me today and with the audience. Honestly, I can't say how much I love the conversation. So it was amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you for a very good conversation.